Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 101 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, that is Gavin, and Gavin, you are physically looking at somebody that is also recording right now.
I am, and it's not Fia. Spoilers. Fia is in the midst of her finals week, so good luck to Fia on all of her finals. But no, instead, we have my wonderful dear wife, Liz, here as a guest host today.
Some might
Liz.
say number one fan of the pod, or number two behind my mother.
I feel like, I was going to say, I feel like number one, it really is Molly.
Shout out to Molly.
Yeah.
Yeah, ever since we upgraded Fia from number one fan of the pod to co-host, I mean, between Molly and Liz, it's hard to say, and I would take
It's
them both.
Molly.
Molly, how's it going? Miss Molly, how is Molly doing?
That's true. You stayed in their house a couple nights. She's doing great.
She's doing great.
That's wonderful.
All right. Well, normally this is the point where we would have Fia read our housekeeping, but Liz, why don't you go ahead? Just read this right here in our Google Doc. We didn't prep any of this beforehand, by the way.
We've gotten a little too reliant on Fia. We used to just do the show, me and you, Gavin. Now we can't handle it, just the two of us.
We sure did. Men, am I right?
Yeah, manly men.
All right, so take it away, Liz.
Don't forget to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to us on, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Give us feedback on the show and any future topics you'd like to hear about on the podcast. And if you would like to be a guest on the show, be sure to fill out the guest form, which you can find in the show notes.
You did great. High five. Next week, we are delving into my deepest fears once again and talking about plants. Next week, we're going to be talking about grass. No, not that. That's not. That might be a grass. I don't actually know yet. That's a problem for future Gavin to decide if what exactly is a grass. Like I know, but I don't know specifics. Anywho, grass is a really important type of plant that is weirder and more complex than you think. But that's next week's problem. As for this week, Mike, what is our Today in History?
So, our Today in History, this is obviously December 7th, and kind of very famously in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a famous thing that happened on December 7th, and you're all familiar with the person that this involves. In 1939, Lou Gehrig was elected to the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame.
Okay.
Lou Gehrig, kind of most famous nowadays for Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS, that people were dunking buckets on their heads for.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What a weird time that we live in.
Yeah, but that was cool. We're gonna dump buckets of water on our head. Like when the internet was, seemed like it was slightly less toxic when really it was just getting ready.
Yeah. And I never did the ice bucket challenge because I was like, I really don't think, if I record myself dumping water on my head, what does that actually do? Because I feel like the majority of people didn't actually donate any money to anything.
Well, wasn't that the point of dumping water on yourself? Was that so you did not have to donate? Or do I have that entire movement wrong?
I have no idea.
The whole point was to participate in something with a global community. Was the whole, it's like you are participating, you're raising awareness, and either you donate money or you dump water on your head, or both.
Okay.
So, that was, Today in History. It was hard to find something from December 7th to talk about.
Very difficult, yeah. No real major events in American history.
Total snooze fest.
I tell you what, December 7th, I really wish that there was more to go on here, because my students in class, all the time, they ask themselves, hey, Mr. Bryson, what was happening on December 7th, like in the 1940s, maybe? So in the 1940s, there was some cool stuff going on, and I have to always tell them December 7th, nothing at all.
A date that will live in
boredom.
Ambiguity.
Yeah.
Anonymity.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to take a real deep dive to find something.
I had to go all the way back to the 1930s to find the thing I found.
Yeah.
So,
if something cool would have happened that they could have made, I don't know, a really big, fancy movie about, that a bunch of seventh
every
graders
movie
watch in social studies class. I don't know.
Or every movie is based around that.
Yeah.
Because every other movie, but there was nothing there. if you don't know what we're talking about, just Google December 7th, and you'll be like, oh, I should.
We didn't want to do the obvious one.
Well, it was mostly me, because
it was. Well, no, I agree.
I am, depending on who you talk to, I am somewhere between a contrarian and oppositional defiant. So I could just go with the obvious one, but that kind of clears up all of our pre-show garbage. So Gavin, take it away. What on earth are we learning about today? I don't have a clue what this is, by the way.
We are learning about Australia, the land down under.
Australia. Awesome. I can tell you about Australia. They got emus.
They sure do, and they will come up briefly.
Sweet.
So, we've talked a bit about some continents. You know, we had a whole episode about Antarctica. I think that was episode 91, if I remember correctly. And we talked a bit about South America really early on when we talked about the time when North America and South America reconnected and exchanged all of their animals and plants and stuff. And the northern animals just completely dominated the southern animals, which is historically how things tend to go. But we haven't talked much about Australia. Australia is very strange. Australia is right up there with South America for being one of the most unique continents, and pretty much for the same reason, but to a much bigger extent, and that's isolation.
Gavin, I need you just one of these times, I need you to begin the episode with, this is exactly what you think. Not strange at all.
I don't think that's going to happen. Because everything's weirder than you think it is.
We're in too deep, okay?
Yeah. See, I'll save that for a week where I'm like, actually, that might be a Christmas episode, realistically. Because we have a lot of stuff going on around Christmas this year, so I'll keep that one in my back pocket.
This one, if you had to throw a dartboard at something you think is correct, yes, everything. But all right, so Australia, weird.
Very weird. And the main difference between Australia and South America is that Australia is still isolated. South America, had been isolated for about 30 million years, but like I said, reconnected to North America around 2 or 3 million years ago. And since then, it started to look a lot more normal to the rest of the world, because North America, over the last, 20, 30 million years has gotten a lot of interchange with Eurasia. And then because Eurasia is connected to Africa, Africa, Eurasia, and North America have all been interchanging for a really long time. And then South America joined the mix, and most of the stuff from the rest of the world got to go down to South America. However, Antarctica's covered in ice. Nothing but penguins live there. If you want to hear more about the rest of the stuff that lives there, check out episode 91. But Australia is the only continent that still has a lot of life on it that is still really isolated, which makes it really weird in comparison to everything else. And there's one particular group of life that Australia is the most famous for, and that would be the marsupials, which are very fun, pocketed little mammals.
We're talking about kangaroos?
We sure are.
All right.
among other things.
Wait, there's more than that?
Oh, there sure is.
Like, what other things have pockets in them? You've got kangaroos, and that's it.
Famously, not women's clothes.
Thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah, I thought I had to there. But lots of other mammals. We'll talk about a bit about some of them here in a little bit. But it's more than you think. So before we get into any of the life about Australia, let's talk about just the continent itself a little bit. So Australia as a country is just the one big island and a few smaller islands off the coast, like Tasmania very famously is quite a big island, but Australia itself is a giant island, so it's a lot smaller in comparison. So that's Australia the country, but Australia the continent also includes New Guinea, which is a bit north of it. That's not where guinea pigs come from. That's why it's the new one. But so it is, I believe New Guinea is the second largest island. I don't know which one they're excluding besides Antarctica and Australia, because both of those are definitely bigger than New Guinea. But Yeah, I don't know. I didn't look too much into that one. And technically, if you want to get fancy, the Australian plate, the tectonic plate that Australia is on, was at one point fused with the Indian plate. And
Really?
now
Just those
they're
two?
kind of separate. Yeah, just those two. And they were distinct plates. They were fused for a time, and then depending on what research you look at, they are currently not fused. I had always learned that they were fused until doing the research for this episode, and then it's like, well, I think just last year there's been some more convincing evidence that they're not anymore. Unsure. But regardless, Australia is notable, again, for just being very weird with a lot of things, including its sort of plate movements. Australia's moving sort of northward as a continent. And for a continent, it's moving really quickly. It moves around a little over 2 inches per year.
Ooh. A question on that.
Yeah.
When it comes to the movement of tectonic plates, I guess this is sort of two questions. Number one, when we're talking about tectonic plates moving at a particular rate, is that like a broadly smooth, like they're moving at 1 inch or 2 inch or 3 inches? Is that just like really smooth and they're moving at 1 inch divided by 365, that amount per day? And then my second question is that I forgot the second question.
Generally, yeah. It is pretty consistent and slow. Earthquakes can speed up that process, but think about it sort of like if you had a balloon that you then tied a weight to and put in the water, how you would just consistently sink that whole time, just slowly. Because that's more or less what the continents are doing, because the continental cycle is mostly driven by the plates being sucked down into the center of the planet.
Right.
And so I actually did out the math for how long it would take it to move a mile because I was curious. It would take about 29,000 years.
It's about how long it takes me to get through a mile also.
I was going, Liz. Well done.
Thanks.
That was very good. Some interesting thoughts, though, about this, because I intuitively, when I think of Australia, and this may be just me being a North American person, when I think of Australia, I also think of New Zealand. And they are not at all really connected.
Yeah, and don't the people there get real pissed off when you say it? Like, they're like,
oh,
no,
they sure do.
Right, they're like stomp the ground and like, we are not the same.
They sure do. And so they're not even on the same plate. Zealandia is its own plate that used to be much bigger than it currently is, but now is sort of much smaller and is kind of fused to the Pacific plate. And they just because they are fairly close to each other, even though there's a large stretch of ocean between them, New Zealand and Australia do share most of like their birds and some reptiles. But famously, New Zealand has no native mammals. So not even the pockets don't really help you get across the ocean like that.
Do we know how they got there?
With the exception of bats.
That's true. There are bats. I tend to not count bats as like because they are so mobile. I don't tend to count them as like.
But that could
native.
be a very fun trivia fun fact that
It
might
is.
help someone in bar trivia one day.
That's true. Bats are native to New Zealand. Fun fact.
Thank you.
Noted.
So Australia, at one point, was considered as far south as continents could be. Once people, I guess European explorers got there, they were like, "Oh, there couldn't possibly." That's my bad imitation of a British accent. Be continents more south than this, which is why it's called Australia. If you remember back to that Antarctic episode, we talked about how Antarctica got its name, and I sort of referenced Australia. That the word Australia comes from Latin for southern land, terra australis. And basically the Romans thought that, there must be land in the south to balance out all this land on the top, on the north. Which obviously is not why that there's land in the south, it just happened to be right. And so that eventually got shortened to Australia once, European explorers got there. Humans, though, got to Australia actually quite early in our history. It's kind of thought that the native Australian people were some of the first, or at least sourced from some of the first people to leave Africa. So they're, the native people in Australia are more sort of genetically closely related to different cultures in Africa than they are to different peoples in Asia or North America, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Europeans came along, and the first sort of confirmed European landing on Australia was in 1606. I believe this person was Dutch. Because for a while, Australia was called New Holland. But most of the colonization of Australia ended up being from England, starting sort of in the late 1700s, where famously it was used as a penal colony. That's not just like an urban legend. That's actually true.
Right.
For Great Britain's prisoners. They would send all their prisoners there. Which, if you've met people from Australia, it explains a lot. I have a couple of friends from Australia. And they even are like,
so that makes it okay.
Oh, yeah. And they are like, yeah, we know.
It's like if Florida got its own country. I'm kidding. Too
No,
far.
you're not. It's not too far. It's actually really accurate.
I'm really sorry.
Did you have something, Mike?
Nope, not to cover that. That is
All right.
top tier stuff right there.
Awesome. So with all that boring human stuff out of the way, geology. Australia is a really, really old continent. And by that, I mean that a lot of the bedrock sort of at the surface is really old. Most of the oldest rocks in the world come from Australia, as well as the oldest like individual minerals that sort of make up the rocks. Because minerals, once they're formed, can sort of be reworked into other rocks. It's sort of like if you break off a piece of silly putty, and then you use that, several other pieces of silly putty to make a new thing of silly putty, if that makes sense. Not the best analogy, but it'll work.
I think I put your butt down though.
Oh, thank you. So the oldest rocks on Australia are somewhere around, upward of 2 billion years old. But the oldest minerals are older than the moon.
And how old is the moon?
Give or take 4 billion.
And the planet itself is only, 4.6? So we're talking about stuff that was around
there.
At the formation of the planet.
Oh, yeah. There are minerals that we can find in Australia that are older than, like, the solar system really settling. Wow. Which is crazy. So Australia is a really cool place for studying sort of how Earth got to be the way it is long, long, long time ago. It's also really unique geologically because it's kind of in the middle of its tectonic plate. So it is much more like the eastern coast of North America than the western coast. Because the west coast, there's a very famous plate boundary there, which is why there's a lot of earthquakes. And then especially in like the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of volcanoes and stuff. There, to my knowledge, and from what I was able to find, not a single active volcano on all of Australia. Which is saying something, because it's a big continent.
I want to say I saw that on a Snapple lid.
Interesting.
Back in the day. That was like Snapple. The fun fact that volcanoes are the only thing not trying to actively kill you on Australia.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but no, earthquakes are quite rare. Especially big ones are very rare. However, it is sort of partially in that ring of fire area that sort of goes around the Pacific. So they do have pretty common like tsunami watches for all the earthquakes and stuff that happen offshore. So volcanoes might not be trying to kill you in Australia, but the water is.
Awesome.
Add it to the list.
Yeah. Australia throughout its history has been part of every single supercontinent, going all the way back to Rodinia, which is probably not one that anybody has ever heard of, but it was around somewhere in the ballpark of a little less than 1 billion years ago, around 800 million or so. And of course, Pangaea. But the supercontinent that Australia is best known for is the one called Gondwana that we've talked about a whole lot on this,
I've heard this
podcast.
one. Even I remember this.
Right. So Gondwana is often called the southern supercontinent. So it was made up of Australia, South America, Africa, Antarctica, India, and Madagascar as well. Because Madagascar kind of does its own thing. Madagascar is a little weird. We'll have an episode at some point about Madagascar because it is quite strange as well. So basically everything that's currently in the southern hemisphere plus India. And so this supercontinent started forming around 800 million years ago, basically as soon as Rodinia, the previous supercontinent, was breaking up, and finished with Australia and Antarctica joining the rest around 600 million years ago. And none of the times here are particularly important, just sort of the order of operations is what's going to be important here. So a little while later, in the Carboniferous period, episode 81, Pangaea formed fully together, all the continents hanging out in this sort of big C shape almost across the center of the planet. And they hung out together for about a few dozen million years, and then Gondwana broke back off. Pretty much all the Gondwanan continents stayed together and continued to break apart throughout the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. And one by one, they all sort of broke off first. So first was Africa, and then India, and then Madagascar. So that basically left South America, Antarctica, and Australia connected.
So you had like two supercontinents, right?
At this point, 3-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was one that was, like I said, South America, Australia, and Antarctica. Then Africa was still like kind of connected to South America at this point, but barely. Africa was kind of doing its own thing. Madagascar and India were both off islands at this point doing their own thing. And then the northern continents were fairly connected at this point, but not super connected.
Gotcha.
And so the last cousin to leave Australia was Antarctica. Those two hung out for quite a long time until they finally split apart around 60-ish million years ago. And like I said, time's not particularly important, but just the general recap, because it becomes important later, all these different connections. So Gondwana comes together, joins the northern continents to form Pangaea. Pangaea breaks up, but Gondwana's staying whole as a family. and then slowly the family starts to dwindle as Madagascar and India break off. Africa breaks off. South America kind of breaks off because it's still kind of with Africa. Then South America fully leaves, leaving just Antarctica and Australia. And then finally, 60-ish million years ago, Antarctica breaks off. Australia's off on its own. And so, for roughly the time since the dinosaurs went extinct, Australia has been completely alone.
Which I imagine has a number of effects on like everything in Australia, considering there was just no contact between Australia and everything else on the planet. But like, how different is that from just like what the Americas experienced versus Europe? Like, is it just is there a difference because it's smaller, I guess is my question, or does it wind up being a similar kind of thing, just on a different scale?
So similar in a sense to South America before it reconnected with North America. But like I said, so Africa quickly went up and joined Eurasia. Eurasia's always been sorted together. So not long after Africa broke off of Gondwana, it was close enough to Eurasia to get some kind of, animal and plant interchange. And then North America was constantly exchanging things with Eurasia across what is effectively now Alaska to Russia, sort of. But at the time, it was much more south than that. So with rising and falling sea levels, those, North America and Eurasia were connected and then not connected and then connected and then not connected. So they were constantly exchanging stuff. So South America and Australia were pretty much the two weirdos off doing their own thing until South America reconnected with North America. And we saw how that went. But Australia never had that. And so as I think many of us learned during COVID times, isolation makes it real weird.
That's a good way to put it.
So I know I got a little weird in like the first couple months of COVID. So I think that's a good time to transition to some of its life, some of the life that lives there. So let's get some of the less iconic stuff out of the way first. So stromatolites. We have mentioned those briefly on the channel before. And they're strange because they're kind of hard to wrap your mind around. So we find them very commonly as fossils because they're some of the very first ever life that was around, billions of years ago that left fossils. And so there are these layers of bacteria that leave sort of these mats of sediment that, the bacteria grow in like the sort of sheet. And the way that their body chemistry works is that they make minerals come out of the water, but then they do photosynthesis, so they need access to sunlight. So they move up above that new layer of minerals. A new layer of minerals comes, and they have to sort of move up above that. So it makes sort of this layered dome structure.
I went ahead and I looked up a photo of it because I know I've seen them before at museums and everything, but I had to remind myself, and it came up as one of my previously searched things. I'm like, oh, sad.
So, like I said, extremely common as fossils because for give or take 1 billion years, they were the only things around making fossils. However, Australia is one of like 2 places in the world where you can go and still find living ones.
Where else?
So they're at least marine ones. I think there's a couple of places where you can find freshwater ones. I didn't actually look where the other one is. But I know you can find them in a place called Shark Bay in Western Australia. And they just, the water there, because it is a sort of lagoon bay, very little new seawater gets added into the bay, but it's Australia, it's very hot. So the water evaporates and makes it really, really salty. And so it's so salty, the only things that can live there are bacteria.
The other location is in the Bahamas.
Oh,
there we
in case
go.
You're wondering.
Neat. That's we'll make that a vacation sometime.
Hey.
Yeah, so they're really rare to find, after sort of complex multicellular life gets going, because mats of bacteria are very tasty to things like snails and other, give or take herbivorous animals. So once things are around to eat them, they become much less common as fossils, which is why they're very rare to see alive today. So it's really cool that there is a place where you can, look at them. I'm jealous of geology students in Australia because they get to look at stromatolites as fossils and then take a field trip and go see them out in the world, which is pretty cool.
So this is just because there was never really any predators for them?
Right, and it's like, so these kinds of bacteria are pretty much everywhere, but they don't organize themselves like this because things will eat them if they do. They're pretty much everywhere in the seawater, but they just kind of float around to do photosynthesis. They don't organize themselves in these ways while things are around to eat them.
They don't create these like colonies.
Right, yeah.
Understood.
So, neat, fun thing there. Also, it'd be wrong of me to not at least mention the Great Barrier Reef when we're talking about Australia. It's the largest reef system in the world, and it has a huge amount of diversity in every kind of sea life you can really imagine that we're just going to gloss over here because we could spend the entire rest of the episode talking just about the Great Barrier Reef, but we have things to do.
I was going to say I had some questions, but those will be shoved down for another time.
Absolutely.
Another episode.
Yeah, we'll make sure we have Fia on for that one. It's right up her alley.
Maybe we can find an Aussie.
Maybe. Most of the Aussies that I know are not science people. And to the point where I don't think they would know anything about the reef. No
Sounds
offense
like you
to
need
them,
to diversify
but
your friend group there, Gavin.
I'm sorry that not many Aussies come to central Pennsylvania. I mean, well, to be fair, the ones that I met were in Watertown, New York. Like, that's a more worldly place.
I mean, Watertown, we're talking about the Great Barrier Reef. Makes sense to me.
You're right. You got me. All right, so that's some of the water stuff. But let's talk about some of the life on land, because that's where life gets real extreme here. And especially in its uniqueness. So 46% of the birds, 69, nice, percent of the mammals, 94% of the amphibians, 93% of the reptiles, 90% of the insects, 90% of the mollusks, so clams, snails, slugs, 85% of the vascular plants, and 79% of palms only live in New Guinea or Australia.
Good God.
So the ones that are there live nowhere else, just Australia.
And how are they doing with those domestic house cats?
Oh, not great. We'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, so particularly the things like the birds, birds can come and go, which is why it's a lower percent for them. But the mammals, the especially the amphibians and reptiles that are not as able to move from place to place, extreme amount of they're called endemic species that are found in one place and nowhere else. So basically what that means is if you are from anywhere in the world and you go visit Australia, very few of the wild animals there will look very familiar to you. So let's take a quick walk through some of the life, starting with in my opinion, as much as I love reptiles, the less interesting ones, the reptiles. So this is the only place, and I'm looking at Liz saying to apologetically because I know how much she hates snakes.
I understand it comes with the territory of Australia. Like, I understand. Yeah. And I do want to visit Australia one day, but Lord have mercy, am I going to have to be heavily medicated?
Oh, yeah. This is the only place in the world that I was able to find where the number of species of venomous snake is larger than the number of species of non-venomous snake.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
So you're saying number of species. All right, fine. Number of species. What about just total number of snakes?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, because the snakes that are there are kind of strange. The biggest and most numerous snake family everywhere else in the world only has like 11 species in Australia. And I think most of them only got there within the last couple of thousand years, so I don't think they're particularly widespread.
Huh. Okay.
So,
but we're not sure which there's more, just like snakes in general, venomous versus non-venomous.
Right.
Okay.
And there are, like I said, a good number of non-venomous snakes there. There's a number of pythons, but many of the snakes there, particularly the ones that you hear about a lot, are members of the same family as cobras. So these are things like the inland taipan, which is the most venomous snake in the world. Any number of sea kraits, they're all in the same family as things like cobras.
Huh.
Not only is it, the home to all of these venomous snakes, is the home to lots of monitor lizards. There's one whole branch of monitor lizards is found only in Australia called the goannas. And they're basically, monitor lizards, but they tend to be the ones with like the longer, sort of thinner necks, as opposed to some other species like savanna monitors that have these big chunky heads. And this is also generally the region of the world where things like the Komodo dragon lives. I think the Komodo dragon does have a fossil record in Australia, but not much of one. Lots of other common lizards that you would see as pets in a lot of places, such as blue-tongued skinks. Bearded dragons come from Australia. Things like the frilled lizard, the one species of lizard, because it's only one, that has the frill that it can poke out from the sides of its neck. That's found in Australia, because where else would it come from?
Of course.
Then there are two species of crocodilians found in Australia. The saltwater croc, which is the largest reptile on the planet, and one of only two species of reptiles known to actively hunt and kill people, like, on purpose. Things like alligators will eat you if it finds you and you're laying down unconscious or something, as people in Florida are wont to do.
No, we hunt for sport here.
Yeah, no, here they actively have been like documented like stalking people to hunt them.
Oh,
Yes. The other one is the much smaller and generally more skittish Australian freshwater crocodile. Again, only found in Australia. Birds. There are lots of groups of endemic birds, but most of the groups of birds that are sort of most famous from Australia are sort of shared across all of the Gondwanan continents. So this would be the ratites, which are your large flightless birds, including...
Come on, Mike.
the emu.
Absolutely.
Yes, we can talk about the emu now.
Absolutely.
We're doing it.
Emus are the second largest bird on the planet. Large, flightless murder machines. Liz knows I have a thing with birds. I don't generally like birds. For me, it's
a
mostly
bit of a problem. I'm kind of sad.
Yeah,
for you.
For me, it's mostly geese. I hate geese so much.
And not just Canadian geese, like
No.
the cute white ones that you see at a park.
We didn't have those in our parks growing up. But the first time I went to a park in California, there was just a bunch of just like domestic geese around like the pond there. And I got out of the car, and we just went there to just, on like a Sunday for a walk or something to play Pokemon Go. And I got out of the car and saw 20 or so geese and was like, I don't know if I can do this.
And they were just vibing, just living their lives.
They were just hanging out.
Children feeding them food that they definitely should not be eating.
No.
And then for some reason, I had this great idea that clearly if he doesn't like this cute domestic bird, I should really take him to go see really cool big birds like emus.
Yeah, there's an emu and ostrich farm near where we used to live in California.
Yeah, you may have heard of it, Mike. Have you ever been there?
As it turns out, I had a guided tour there at one point.
Wow, that sounds like a real professional.
That gives us a lot of credit that we don't deserve.
Dude, that was wild. That was wild. Yeah. They were right there, and I was holding the food out for them, and they were like, they could have killed me, but they didn't.
Exactly. They wanted to, I promise.
Prisoners of war.
Yes.
Yeah. Vietnam flashbacks. Australia flashbacks. Emus, as much as we're joking about them, are, like I said, the second largest bird on the planet. Large, flightless birds related to things like ostriches. And also, I believe the third largest bird on the planet, the cassowary, also lives in the northern parts of Australia and also in New Guinea. These are the sort of... Their feathers are like very black. They tend to have like bluish faces, and then they have this big sort of crest on their head that I think is usually called a helmet because it is like very hard and keratinous. Those are actively extremely mean, as in my opinion, as all birds are. And so 2 out of 3 of the largest birds, and realistically the only 2 that can like actually probably kill you, 2 of the 3 that can actually probably kill you.
I mean, I would like to point out that there's actually quite a few deaths by chickens or roosters.
Okay.
Yearly.
Fine.
Salmonella doesn't count.
Not what I was referring to, but sure, Mike. That too.
Yeah.
Add that to the list.
The other group of sort of shared Gondwanan birds are the parrots. Parrots, are very famous from places like South America and Africa, but are also found all over Australia. And then there's one little species of penguin, literally called the little penguin. That is its name.
That's funny.
That's very precious.
It's very cute. And also many, many invasive species as well. Lots of introduced birds, robins, starlings, pretty much every kind of thing has been introduced to Australia because Europeans got there and saw a big, wide open, quote unquote, wide open continent. We're like, I like to hunt these things back home. I'll bring them here.
If it could sit in a ship,
yeah,
we could get there.
And now on to, in my opinion, the fun ones, the mammals. So mammals broadly are broken into 3 big groups. The placental mammals, which is most mammals. Basically, 99% of the time, if you are thinking of a mammal, it is a placental mammal. Everything from humans to dogs to cats, elephants, whales, whatever. The next one is the marsupials, which are the pouched mammals.
Love.
Yes.
Love.
These are things like your kangaroos, koalas, wombats, possums, and opossums, because those are different. Famously, the Virginia opossum,
I love them.
the lone species of marsupial here in North America.
Am I correct in saying that kangaroos are the coolest, though?
Oh, they are very cool.
Okay.
They're so fun. We'll talk about them a little bit, because they have one particularly strange relative in the fossil record.
Okay.
The last of the three main groups are the monotremes. And these are the egg-laying mammals.
Like good old Perry the Platypus.
Exactly. So, while monotremes have a pretty decent fossil record kind of around the world, there are some, I believe there's some even found in North America, but they started in Australia and are now only found in Australia and New Guinea, and there's only 5 species left. There's 4 species of echidna, which if you don't know what an echidna is, it's sort of a hedgehog-like animal. They have these big mole-like hands, but like a thin kind of anteater beak kind of thing. And then the 1 species of platypus.
Platypus.
No, Mike.
Oh my
No.
god.
What? What?
Yeah, and they are just like every other mammal. They are warm-blooded. They have fur, except that they lay eggs, and that unlike other mammals, they don't have nipples. They have specialized sweat glands like on their stomach, and they just like sweat milk, which is strange. Yeah, monotremes are just very weird.
I mean, look, I'm not here to kink shame anybody. If that's what your species wants to do, go for it.
Mom, I'm really sorry.
I wasn't gonna go. I wasn't gonna give a shout out to Molly right now, but now that you did,
Okay, so marsupials. Gavin,
Yes.
tell me about my marsupials.
Marsupials. I don't remember us doing a whole episode about them. I don't think we have. But marsupials are so heckin' strange. We will have to do an episode about them at some point. Very quick rundown of marsupials. They are very similar to placental mammals in that they don't lay eggs. They have proper nipples like a good mammal should. And they actually technically do have a placenta, but it lasts very short. It's not like even things like mice, which have a gestation period like a pregnancy that is very short. It's nothing compared to what marsupials go through. So marsupials are born as these tiny little jelly bean, pink little thing with arms, and that basically the first part of the body that's not like a necessary organ that develops is the arms, because they are not as much born as much as they just crawl out of the birth canal and use those 2 arms to just claw their way up into the pouch.
Yep.
which
is where
the mother.
the nipples
Oh,
are
no.
located. What?
They're smaller than a jelly bean.
Okay.
Yeah. Like that. Yeah, I would say like, so the largest species of marsupial is the red kangaroo, which gets vaguely like adult human size. When they are born, so when they leave the birth canal and make the journey into the pouch, I'd say probably about jelly bean size for those. And that's about as big as they get for brand new newborns. And they will stay in the pouch for varying amounts of time, but basically until they get to the point where a placental mammal would be born. They stay in the pouch. And they basically more or less fuse their mouth to the nipple and just sit there and drink. And this, among other things, allows the mother to basically be constantly pregnant and be giving birth more or less constantly. And it's sort of thought that this is an adaptation to relatively harsh conditions, because it is easier to make milk than it is to like nourish a whole thing inside of you, where if times get especially hard, you can just reach into the pouch, throw the baby out, and move on with your life. Where it's harder and more stressful to do that if you are like internally pregnant.
Marsupials just live in the dream.
Welcome to the real world, son.
Yeah. So that's sort of the main difference between marsupials and placental mammals. There's lots of other.
Oh yeah, I have so many fun facts, but
Yeah.
I'll keep them in my pocket
Ooh.
for when you guys do the episode specifically about
Absolutely.
I thought they
marsupials.
didn't give you pockets.
Well, she's wearing pajamas right now. Actually, your pajamas do not currently have pockets, which is funny. Oh, yes, they do. There they are. Okay. Wait, I was
great.
wrong. That was something else.
Your hand is just in my pants.
Jesus.
This is great.
Anyway,
This is great radio
this is
content,
content,
here.
folks. Yep. So the cool thing about Australia with the marsupials is that basically anything you can think of, any role outside of like large herbivore, Australia has a marsupial that does that. Deer, basically kangaroos. Kangaroos fill the same exact ecological role as deer do.
Including getting hit by cars.
Yeah, actually.
Yes, in fact.
Moles. They sure got lots of different kinds of marsupial moles. Mice, lots of those little guys. Dogs, sort of. We'll circle back to that. Flying squirrels, even as something as weird as that. Yeah, sugar gliders. Those are marsupials. Raccoons. They're fun little trash pandas here in North America. Bandicoots.
Which is one of my favorite animal names.
Yeah, famously Crash Bandicoot. They basically do the same thing as raccoons here. They even have sort of a version of a cat, which are called quolls. And so basically, like I said, everything except for large, cow-sized herbivore, marsupials got. At least, even currently. There used to be a lot more different kinds, and we'll sort of circle around to that. So I already talked about the largest living marsupial being the red kangaroo, but the largest living carnivorous marsupial, because most of the ones that you kind of think about are things like kangaroos, wombats, koalas. All of those are herbivorous. But there are a handful of carnivorous marsupials, the largest being the Tasmanian devil, which is only roughly small dog sized.
They are actually extremely cute, and I did one of my elementary school projects on them because I was that kid.
Currently, they only live on the island of Tasmania, which is that island sort of off the south of mainland Australia. They used to live on the main continent up till about 600 years ago, so this one is not the European colonizers' fault. This one is not. But there's been lots of efforts to sort of try and breed and reintroduce them, so that's sort of a relatively current thing that's going on right now with them. Very famously, though, there used to be another larger predator called the thylacine, or as most people probably know it, the Tasmanian tiger.
There's a Tasmanian tiger?
Well, there used to be.
Oh, man, I was going to look this up and get so excited.
You can look up a photo of it. Please.
Even videos. There are videos that exist of it, because the last one died in 1936 was when the last one died. So this was big-ish dog-sized. Like, it would probably be, give or take, the same size as our golden retriever, but a bit more slender. No offense, Lottie. I love you, but you're not
thick?
slender. So it'd be about 2 feet tall at the shoulder, 35 to 40 pounds or so. And they used to live all across Australia, and we know that from things like cave drawings. All across Australia, and even on New Guinea, that island sort of off the north. And the last wild one was shot and killed in 1930. There is a picture of the person who shot it standing there with their gun smiling, because it was just around their house, and they shot it and killed it, the last one, and took a picture of it. And then the final one, that was the last wild one. The final one was died in a zoo in 1936.
Quick follow-up question.
Yep.
So in Googling Tasmanian tiger, there's a New York Times headline, Tasmanian tigers are extinct. Why do people keep seeing them? Is there a possibility that Tasmanian tigers still exist in some small number in the wild, or are people mistaking them for something else?
People are mistaken.
Yeah, it's sort of like how people all over New York are like, I swear I saw a mountain lion. And I'm like, no, unless you're in the Adirondacks, no, you didn't. And even
I saw Mothman once.
Well, it's at least these were real.
Yes.
Where it's like, it's something that used to live, like I said, all over Australia. And the chances of it being alive at this point, almost 100 years after the last one was seen in a place that is quite heavily developed.
And being so large as they are.
Right. These are not particularly small animals. So, yeah, odds are very, very, very slim. However, there have been recent efforts to try and clone the thylacine to be able to bring it back, which is actually one that I kind of agree with. I'm generally not in the camp of de-extincting things, but this is one that I'm kind of much more on the side of I think we should.
If you're gonna do it, this
Right.
would be a great candidate.
Huh. Do we want to talk about why that is, or is that a story for another time?
That's a story for another time. We're already pretty deep in this episode, and we got stuff to do still.
Okay.
But I would highly recommend anybody look up pictures or videos of them because they are freakily similar to like dogs and wolves, to the point where if you showed most people a skull, they would absolutely call it a dog skull. Even to the point where, like, if you go to the Wikipedia page, I had to really look at it to be able to point out like a difference or two. They are freakily similar to dogs and wolves. But moving on to the last group of mammals here, there are two groups of native placental mammals. One being, of course, bats. Yeah, bats sure did get there. And then a couple of species of mice and rats, which have only been there for 5 to 10 million years or so. So even they were relatively recent arrivals. And of course, lots of invasive species of things like house cats, horses, several different kinds of deer, cattle, and even camels.
And lots of sheep. There's a lot of sheep herding in Australia.
We have Australian camels?
Not natively, but now, yes.
Okay,
I
awesome.
heard that there's camels here in Pennsylvania being raised. There's camels everywhere.
Well, I mean, like, out living in the wild.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My bad.
But yeah, there's like feral populations of these things. And then also, you can't talk about Australian animals without talking about the dingo.
Oh, I forgot these things are real.
They sure are, buddy. So, dingoes, famously, are a breed of dog that was brought to Australia somewhere between 8,500 and 5,000 years ago with a group of people. It's kind of unsure, which particular like cultural group brought them, to the continent, but well before Europeans got there. And eventually this, some of them got out and became feral and just took over the entire continent, and to the point where they are now considered native. Like under pretty much every Australian law, it varies from state to state and locality to locality, but under national Australian laws, they are considered native, which I think is kind of neat.
So this is kind of one of those where they're not technically native, but they've been there for so long, in compared to when humans have cared, that we're just calling it good enough.
Right. And to the point where they are pretty well integrated into the ecosystem, unlike cats.
Right.
Where things will eat dingoes, and especially because they have lots of reptiles there that are big enough to do it. So that's all of, definitely not all, but all the modern living is we're going to talk about. So let's go into some of the fossil stuff here. So this might be a little bit of an extendo episode, but that's okay. The first fossils come from some of those stromatolites around 1 billion years ago. So some of the first ever fossils are found in Australia.
Really?
Yes.
Were they found by Europeans, like, screwing around there? Were they found by Australian researchers? Like,
off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I would imagine that they were found by people who were looking for them for science purposes. I'm sure that they were stumbled across by native Australians, but like we said last episode, I couldn't really find all that much about native Australian folks doing things associated with fossils, throughout their history. Although I did apparently miss the cave drawings of thylacines throughout the entire continent, so that's on me from last episode. But well after that billion years ago, we find some of the very earliest forms of complex life in the Ediacaran period. So that's the period right before the Cambrian period. The Cambrian being famous for the Cambrian explosion, which is when complex multicellular life started to look recognizable to us. So right before that, we kind of, for a really long time, didn't know of any complex multicellular, especially animals, but really life at all. And then we found this location in Australia where we can sure tell that this is a life thing, that it's probably not a plant, but we don't know if it's an animal or something closely related to animals, but not an animal. So if you look up Ediacaran fossils, you'll go down a very deep rabbit hole that we do not have time to go down today. But we have learned so much about what life was like before the Cambrian explosion from Australia. Moving a little quickly through Australia, because Australia, like I said, because it's a very old continent, and a lot of the surface bedrock is really old, compared to some other continents, Australia doesn't have as many really well-known fossils. So this is going to go a little quicker.
All right.
We do have some of the earliest plant fossils, like land plants from the Silurian and Devonian periods, when plants first were evolving onto land. We have some early fossils of the first land-dwelling vertebrates, very amphibian-like things from the Devonian period, and then Pangeiforms. And Australia is basically at the very southern end of Pangea, almost on the South Pole.
That fits.
And then, yeah, but even much more south than it is today, much more like where Antarctica is. And as the Carboniferous period, when Pangeiforms sort of goes on, it gets even farther south, and around that time, the global climate cools a lot, so Australia became basically iced over a lot like Antarctica is today, and basically stays frosty for the next several million years, closer to like a dozen, maybe 24 million years.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, compared to today where it's very hot. Australia's a very hot continent. And then we get to the Mesozoic era, which is sort of the time period when the dinosaurs were around. The beginning part, the Triassic period, warmed up quite a lot for Australia, and it became much wetter than it is today. Australia is famously very dry today. And so there were these large fern-covered fields for all these dinosaurs and other animals to eat. And I say fern because grass was not around yet. Spoilers for next episode. So, all that being said, fossils from around this time are quite rare. We know things about the climate through different isotopes and different chemical things that we can do, but fossils from this time in Australia are really, really hard to come by. I think there are only around 20 total dinosaur species known from Australia, which is only slightly more than we have from Antarctica, a place where you can't really do paleontology all that well. So, we have fossils from around this time of monotremes, like I said, those egg-laying mammals. And the earliest one already was like vaguely platypus-like, which is already kind of strange that they were just doing platypus things, 180 million years ago or so, which is really strange.
When would we have expected platypus things to begin?
With something so strange looking, you would sort of expect that to not be like at the beginning of its lineage. You wouldn't expect humans are very strange mammals for everything we do. You wouldn't expect humans to be like at the base of like the ape family tree, for example.
Okay.
Because they are sort of the odd one out.
Okay.
Marsupials. Here's the fun part that I like to talk about with marsupials, because most of my favorite groups of animals, whether it's horses or rhinos, where they are best known for their fossils is not at all where we sort of associate them with today. Because marsupials, while they were by far the most abundant in Australia today, that is not where they first evolved. They first evolved in North America, and then made the long journey south to South America, then across Antarctica, then to Australia. They took basically the longest possible route to get to Australia.
Just imagine being like one of those little jelly beans waking up the next day in a different continent.
And, all this was over, of course, hundreds of millions of years. And so they first show up in North America. I think the earliest ones are known from Utah. And then they actually go extinct in North America. And North America has only very recently regained our opossum just in the last 2 or so million years. So very recent.
And I will protect them with my life.
Yes. Well, they don't need your protection. They're everywhere.
They do need protection. They have 2 brain cells.
That's true. That's a general thing with marsupials as well.
We'll learn all about it in the future
yes.
episode.
Thank you for keeping me on track.
I got you.
So presumably there should be lots of good marsupial fossils on Antarctica, but we can't currently find them. So take a long drive and just think, I'm doing this for the paleontologists. So the other place other than Australia that marsupials are well known is South America, which makes sense.
Right.
They had to go through South America on the way to Australia, and also as Gondwana was breaking up over this same time here, South America was the second to last continent to break off from Australia. So during this time, Australia, Antarctica, and South America were sort of just hanging out at the bottom of the world together and full of marsupials. So around this time, after the dinosaurs go extinct, marsupials go on to take over the continent and even outcompeted some of the placental mammals that were there, because there are placental mammal fossils from Australia. Not many, but there are some, which is very strange because this is the only place that really happened. Happened a little bit in South America, but like I said, they fully went extinct in North America, and then one happened to meander back north.
Okay, so it went extinct and then went unextinct?
No, new one. So whatever kinds of marsupials there were in North America went extinct, and then some came north from South America.
Gotcha. Okay, and now we just have the one marsupial, right?
Yes, just the Virginia opossum.
Virginia opossum. That'd be a good band
And then,
name.
Yeah.
I would support that.
Mm-hmm. And then from around the time when the dinosaurs go extinct to the Pleistocene, so only like 2 million years ago or so, we don't have a lot of great fossils for how the different groups of marsupials got to be the way they are. We can save all of that for the marsupials episode at some point, but at this point, I'd like to highlight some of the cool, weird guys from only a couple million years ago to only a couple thousand years ago. Some of them.
Let's do it.
So if you look up fossil marsupials, probably the first one you'll come up with is called Thylacoleo, which is often called the marsupial lion. We like to give marsupials just the name, the marsupial placental mammal. I don't know why we do that a lot, but that tends to just be how it works. So Thylacoleo was basically just like it sounds. It was a large carnivorous marsupial. It sort of had like buck teeth almost at the front, but it also had these gigantic molars, just like one set, if I'm remembering correctly, sort of in the back that just looked like nutcrackers. And they also had these giant thumb claws that were like semi-opposable that they would use to sort of grab and wrestle their prey with. And just sort of like, lions wrestle their prey today. That's why, it's named after lions.
I am looking this up for myself, and the artistic liberties that some people have taken, give it a look, entertain yourself.
I can only imagine what the internet has done.
Yeah.
Monstrosities. Continue.
So that was for a long time the largest mammalian predator on Australia. And for the most part, they were hunting this next thing called Diprotodon, which is basically a giant wombat about the size and weight of a rhino. That basically just looks like your cute little round-nosed wombats, but they just grabbed the corner of it and dragged up a few thousand X. So if you're not familiar with wombats, they look vaguely like bears, but just generally kind of more round.
How big are wombats? Aren't they small?
Smallish. Again, maybe like smallish dog size.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Probably like 20 to 30 pounds. Probably.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I don't know much about wombats other than their poop.
That's true. They poop cubes.
But like this animal would have taken like the position of a large herbivore back in the day.
Yeah, it would have done very similar things to like rhinos, for example. Yeah. I couldn't find any mention of a giant koala.
Oh, that would be so horrifying.
Well, because koalas and wombats are very closely related. And I don't know whether this was sort of on the wombat side or the koala side. I'm not sure. But moving on to our last sort of cool marsupial, was that one kangaroo relative that I mentioned. And oh boy, is it strange. So it was marginally taller than the modern red kangaroos. So again, red kangaroos get roughly 6 feet tall for the big males. This one, called Procoptodon, could get about 6.5 to around 8 feet tall, depending on sort of which skeletons you're looking at. But it was much heavier, well over double the weight, somewhere around 500 pounds or so. And because of this, they likely couldn't hop like kangaroos do. Instead, they walked on the end of their toes bipedally like a human.
Really?
Oh no, I don't like
yes.
that.
If you go to, again, it's called Procoptodon. If you go to its Wikipedia page, you'll see an image of it with like a human next to it for scale. The way it walks is just very scary. The way they depict it walking, very strange. Because modern kangaroos actually cannot move their feet independently of one another. They lost the ability to do that.
Losers.
Yeah. But this guy, it looks like it fully was capable of walking around, stomping around like a human. Which is strange. It's very weird. It also had a very short, blunt face compared to modern kangaroos.
Yeah, I just pulled up the Wikipedia article. This is definitely an image.
Yeah. So basically, if you walked around all day on just your toes, with your heel not touching the ground at all, that's sort of how it looked, as well as maybe a little hunched over with your hands sort of short in front of you. That's sort of the vague vibe that Procoptodon's given off. And then lastly, as we round off, I want to talk about some very neat reptiles that very recently lived there, including things like Megalania, which was a giant monitor lizard, basically a Komodo dragon, give or take twice the size. A strange turtle relative that we very briefly mentioned in our turtles episode, called Myelania. Confusing between Megalania and Myelania.
Are these things related, considering they have similar names?
Nope, not at all.
Well, that's absurd.
Yeah. But Myelania, the turtle, was a member of a very weird, very, very early group of turtles that sort of did tortoise things. So they were terrestrial, they were mostly herbivorous, but they had these big spikes on their skulls, and even to the point where they had like spiked club tails, which is weird.
Well, I just had to look up the Megalania, and screw the whole megalodon theories and conspiracy theories. No, the real horror movie would be about that. We need more information.
Yeah, it's size depictions for that are a little odd because we've never found a full one.
Oh, okay. That makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, so at various points in its research history, it's been depicted as like 50 feet long, which is not what we think anymore. So Komodo dragons, for reference today, are about 20 feet long. Or I'm sorry, about 10 feet long.
Which is still big.
Oh yeah, which is still huge. But these guys could get around 20, and I'd say at least probably close to 8 of that is tail. At least 8. So still very big. give or take the size of like a saltwater crocodile that we talked about earlier. Still really big, not as big as you're probably thinking for a giant lizard.
Yeah, and actually, as I scroll deeper into it, some artist did a depiction of, what it actually looks like versus how I feel like it is depicted. And I just created another megalodon problem.
Yeah.
my apologies for perpetuating those bad falsities. That's all I got.
And then lastly, as if all of that wasn't scary enough, there are even some fully terrestrial crocodilians.
See, this always blows my mind because I always thought that the whole deal with crocodiles and alligators is that they couldn't do anything outside the water. Like they were just completely useless.
Well, even the ones that are around today are still okay out of land. Obviously, that's not their preference, or out of water. That's not, they prefer to be in the water. But yeah, there were some relatives that were fully comfortable on land, where they were running around, potentially more efficiently than monitor lizards and things, but doing very much monitor lizard-esque things.
Which, like, that's a little creepy, scary.
Oh yeah,
but like, I can see your Google Doc in front of me, and I think the next one is the scariest of all.
That sure is true, because
Oh,
it
boy.
literally says, "Then humans arrived, and all those cool guys went away."
Oh, humans, we suck.
Yeah, when the first humans got there, I mean, granted, we were in the middle of sort of a megafaunal extinction at the time anyway, so all the large animals were broadly going extinct. That's when things like mammoths went extinct, etc. So that was just a general trend happening across the planet. How much that is due to humans versus climate things is debated. Most likely a bit of column A, a bit of column B. But it lines up pretty nicely with when the first native Australians got there. So,
and please, if you are in Australia and you have a cat, please keep it indoors.
Yeah.
That's my final message.
I mean, shouldn't you also just get them spayed and neutered?
Oh, absolutely. But you also should be keeping them indoors.
I would think you'd want to, because every other snake out there is going to be able to kill it. I mean,
yeah,
they're not efficient. Those snakes are not efficient enough, clearly, according to
no, you're right.
The cat populations out there.
We didn't even mention cane toads at all this episode either.
I'm coming back for you, baby.
Do we want to mention cane toads, or is that a story for another time?
I don't see another episode where we could, but so basically there was an invasive, I think there was like a pest, some bug or something that they didn't want eating their crops, so they brought these the species of toad over from South America, I think, to eat all the sugarcane pests. They did not do that and exploded in population because nothing was able to tolerate their poisons, because they're toads, they're poisonous. Whereas their predators in South America were able to at least marginally knew how to get around the poisons. They did that, I think, in like the 80s or something, and there are millions and millions and millions of them. They're just absolutely destroying the populations of like native insects over in Australia. So very famously, you can find interviews with people who like go out and hunt cane toads on purpose, or will like actively swerve to hit them with their cars. Yeah, Australians hate the cane toads.
As they should.
Yes, they should.
Noted. All right, do we have anything else to learn about Australia?
I don't think so.
Awesome.
You got any lingering questions?
Oh, questions, comments, concerns, baby. I have them all for you, but I am going to keep them in my pocket. Because it's my bedtime. But
it is her bedtime.
I do want to say thank you to both of you for letting me be on, and I really hope I get to make a return appearance for your marsupial episode, because I think I could really bring something to the table.
It won't all be about opossums. I'm sorry.
I have multiple, fun facts and information. I'm a wealth of it. I did study animal science.
She sure did.
I do have an education in this, and I just happen to have a particular passion for the opossum.
And while those two lovebirds continue to go at it, this has been episode 101 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things
Why'd
that
you
used to
have
be
to
alive.
phrase it like that?
Yeah, that was pretty gross, Mike. You can go home now.
I'm going to go home. In fact, I'm already here. Thank you, Liz, for guest co-hosting, and we will see all of you next week. Until then, take care, everybody.
This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Gavin Davidson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Finella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.